Well, okay, welcome back, everybody. Today's daf is going to be daf Mem Ches. We'll be starting from Mem Zayin towards the bottom over here. I just want to tell you what we're discussing. Very interesting topic we're discussing today, and that is regarding Gerus. Just to recap what the Gemara said, how do you go about making somebody a ger? So you obviously know you have to get a bris milah, and then he has to go to the mikvah. So the Gemara said before, Shnei Talmidei Chachamim oimdim al gabav. When he just can't just go to the mikvah by himself, he has to have, it's going to be actually 3 Talmidei Chachamim in the mikvah while he goes into the mikvah. And he goes into the mikvah, and before he dunks down, that's really what he's going to accept upon himself to become a Jew. So that at that point, they let him know, mitzvahs kalos and mitzvahs chamuros. The Gemara said before, you'd start telling him again, although he knows this already, that it's not easy being a Jew. There's some light mitzvahs and some difficult mitzvahs. And then he goes taval, he goes down to the mikveh, va'alen, he goes up. Harehi kisro l'chol devarav. So that's the mechanism that you need a bezdin in order to make somebody a ger. And that's how it gets into our sugya over here in Masechta Yevamos, because also chalitza needs a bezdin. To validate a chalitza, you need a bezdin. And to make a gerus, you also need a bezdin. Imagine if somebody can decide if he wants to become a ger by himself. I mean, I've had that situation where, a yid marries a guy and he says, oh, she accepted him, she converted. Of course, there's no bezdin, but that's how they view themselves, that they marry Jewish. So that's how the Gemara discusses that. And then the Gemara says, noshim, what about women? The women have to have men present while they go to the mikveh. It's not so known. So by the women, the Gemara said before, moishivin ba'isa b'mayim atzavara, they put her into the mikveh to the neck. And then the bezdin walks in, the male walk in, so they don't see her uncovered. And then they stand outside, and then they tell her everything, and then she goes down onto the mikveh, and that's it. When she comes up, they move out. Okay, and then the Gemara said before, echad ger. This is the same way to become a ger. The echad eved mishuchrar. Let's say a person has a slave. So that that when you have a slave, that slave is like a quasi Jew. That it's a male slave. But he only keeps the mitzvahs that a woman keeps. So if a Jew owns a male goyish slave, so you force that slave to become a Jew, to accept upon himself, all the mitzvahs, for example, not to eat kosher and all the, to keep Shabbos, etc., etc. But he doesn't put on tefillin like a regular male. So that's an eved. Now, a slave that you decide that you want to free him and make him a real Jew, 100% Jew. So then the Gemara is going to say like this, that's what the Brisa says. So here we are. Echad ger ve'echad eved mishuchra. Whether you become a ger, whether you are becoming a slave that's about to become free, okay, we're 5 lines from the bottom. So that means when you're in that mikvah, that's when the bezdin says, okay, do you really want to become a Jew? And you become a Jew. The Gemara now thinks the lakabel all mitzvahs, that in order for an eved to become a full-fledged Jew, when he goes into the mikvah, he has to reaffirm, basically saying that he wants to be 100% of Jew. Okay? That's what the Gemara says, because it's saying the same procedure that you have by a regular convert, you have by an eved that the master wants to free him. So the Gemara asks a question, Ruminu, I'll ask you a contradiction. When was it said that you have to, in the mikvah, before you dunk, you have to accept upon yourself, all the mitzvahs is beger. Avol, but eved mishuchra, a slave that's about to become free. In other words, the master says, I want you, I'm your boss, I want you now to become a 100% Jew. So then the master can force the whole issue. And the Brisa says, Ein sarach lekabel. He doesn't have to accept anything. The master could just say, get into that mikvah, and now come up, and you're a 100% Jew. So we have a contradiction. What's the story regarding an eved that's about to become free? So Amar Rav Sheshes says, Loi kasha. It's not difficult. Ha Reb Shimon ben Elazar. The brisa that says that an Eved does not have to accept upon himself anything is like Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Ha Rabbanim. But the brisa, our first brisa that says a ger and an Eved Meshuchar are the same story, that they both have to accept upon themselves the old mitzvahs, goes according to the opinion of the Rabbanim. The Tanya we learned in the brisa. Now, where do you find in the Chumash about a forced gerus? You would think that only gerus is a voluntary thing. So we look on the psukim in Parshas Kisei. So let's just read it quickly because we're going to be darshaning this parsha in the Gemara today. Kisei la malchama alevecha. The Gemara, the pasuk says that when the Jews will go out to war, and Hashem will make you victorious, v'shavisa, and you'll capture a woman who's amongst the prisoners of war, or shivya, or this was a prisoner of war. Anyway, Ra'isa b'shivya, and you look amongst the prisoners of war, and you see Ashes, a woman who's married, a goyish woman who was married to somebody else, and she was Yefas Toyer, and she's a beautiful woman. V'chashakta ba, and you have a fantasy about her, that you want to marry her. V'lakachta l'chol isha, the pasuk says you have a way to make her into your wife. How do you do it? How do you make her into your wife? She's not Jewish. So the Chumash says you have 5 things to do. First of all, you bring her into the house, into your home, and you do 5 things. First, v'gilchas roisha. Obviously, the direction we're heading is we're trying to make her look unbeautiful. So first, v'gilcha es roisha, we should shave her head off. V'asasas tziporneha, and we're going to learn pshat that means she should let her nails grow. Number 3 is you take off her beautiful clothing that she wore as a prisoner of war because the Goyish woman would try to seduce the Jewish soldiers. So first remove that garment that she was wearing and put her on something like a shmata. And then the Chumash says number 4 is v'yashru b'visecha. She should sit in your house. In other words, she should be in your living room, and you're always bumping into her. And ubachsa esavia ves ima, and she should cry, and you have to force her to cry about losing her father and mother. In other words, she should make noises like she's crying. You can't make somebody cry, but you have to ask her and force her that she should make like she's crying about her father, and this should last yerech yamim, 30 days. And if she does all that, tavei aleha, you can marry her, uve'alta, and you become the husband. You have to treat her like a regular wife. You have to give her food, sheira, clothing. But if after all this procedure you just changed your mind, you realize it was just a fantasy, you didn't really want her, you send her out to so you can't use her as a slave. You have to let her go free. So now the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, so we see in the Chumash, the Bryce, that you have to do a whole procedure for her to become a ger. Remember, she's becoming a ger against her will, because the Torah doesn't say, oh, now she should accept upon being her Jewish and she has to want to. No, she's your prisoner, and you can force her to become a ger and you can marry her. So the Gemara says, the Rabbanan said, when do you say that that she has to go through this procedure? Is shloi kibala aleha, if she never accepted upon herself to become a ger. Avo kibla aleh, let's say as soon as you select her out from the prisoners of war, she says, okay, I want to be Jewish. Matbila mutamar biyad, you could throw her into the mikvah and she's mutter right away because she on her own voluntarily she wants to become a Jew. That's l'chachamim hol. Rab Shimon ben Elazar, Rab Shimon says you can even bypass the whole chumash, the whole procedure of the chumash. Why? When you took her as a prisoner of war, she automatically becomes your slave. And therefore, as a slave, so he says like this, even though she doesn't want to be a Jewish, first of all, you could force her, make her go to the mikvah and she's a maid. You first then ask her to go back into the mikvah again and become a Jew, become a Jewish, and then you free her, write her, get shichra. So in other words, you could actually, once she's your maid, you don't have to ask her if she wants to become a Jew. You could actually demand that she becomes 100% a Jewess and go into the mikveh again for becoming a free Jew. So we see umutana miyad, and she's permitted right away. Because according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, interestingly enough, this whole procedure is that if you don't want to, force her right away, you want to give her time. But if you really want to bypass the whole procedure of the Chumash, you can make her your slave, throw her into the mikveh, and then tell her, now I'm going to free you as my slave, and throw her into the mikveh again, but on condition you become a Jewess. So we see, according to Rabbi Shimon, a slave does not have to re-accept when she goes into when they go into the mikveh, they don't have to accept that they're becoming a Jew. So, and according to Rabbanan, you do. So that's how you resolve the difficulty between the two brises. Regarding one brisa says that Eved does have to accept upon herself, and another brisa says that an Eved does not have to accept upon himself. An Eved you could become free just by going straight into the mikveh. Omar Rava says, we're on top of Mem Chasam Ralph, my Talmud Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. How do I know? Where do you see? What's the reason of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar that you can force your own slave to become a Jew? How do I know I can force my slave? The pasuk says, when you're, this is again a Daf Yomi coincidence that we're talking about Korban Pesach, and the pasuk says, Kol Eved Ish Miknas Kosef. The Torah says that if you have a slave, and your slave does not have a bris milah, you cannot bring the Korban Pesach. You can't eat from the Korban Pesach. And the Torah says, Eved Ish, if you have a slave belonging to man, the Torah says, Umal Ta'oisa, if you give him a milah, then you can eat the Korban Pesach. So Eved Ish, V'loi Eved Isha, the Gemara says, if it's a slave of a man, what about a slave of a woman? If a woman owns a slave, does that mean that she can eat the Korban Pesach if her slave does not have a bris milah? That cannot be, because the Torah says miknas kosef. Anytime you buy a servant with money, it's your slave. You have to make sure that they have a bris milah. Ella, what is this? What is the Chumash teaching you? Eved ish atamol bar korchai. According to this means that an eved, which is owned by a man, in other words, that has a master, then the master can force him to have a bris milah. And what the Gemara is saying like this, just like you can force your slave to have a bris milah, you could actually force your slave to accept upon himself, whether he wants it or not, to become a full-fledged Jew. But a ger, just a regular goy, can't force his son to become a Jew. A ger who wants to be Megayer, he could be Megayer himself, but he can't force it upon his son. But an Eved a master could force his slave to become a Jew. So we have forced conversions here. Rabbanan don't agree with that idea. So what did they do with this pasuk called Eved Ish? Amma Ula. First of all, Ula says, Kishem sh'i atamol ben ish bal karchai, kach I atamol Eved Ish bal karchai. Just like a goyish father can't make his son a ger, so also a master cannot force his slave to become a ger. The Ella Hoksiv Kol Eved Ish, but the pasuk does say that a master has control of his slave. So what is that teaching you? That teaches you another teaching of Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel says, Hamafkir Abda Yotzel Lecheres. If you relinquish ownership by saying that your slave is hefker, free for anybody to take, that it goes free, and you don't even have to write a get shichra. You don't have to write a document like he's going free. Just say hareyat, like you did by bittul chametz. It's hefker. So same thing like this. Normally, when you want to free a slave, if you don't want to make it hefker, there's a whole procedure of writing a get. But Shmuel came up with a chiddush that from the pasuk, Eved Ish, if only an Eved that belongs to a person needs a get shichra. But there's another way to avoid the whole thing of get shichra, is just saying that your Eved is free. Your Eved is hefker. Shnamar, call Eved Ish miknas kafnes. Eved Ish, v'lo Eved Isha, ela Eved yesh lo rishus rabbi olav. If the slave that has the jurisdiction of his master over him, karu Eved, that's called your slave. But if his master does not have control over him, in other words, the master not freed him, but said he should be hefker, ein kari Eved, that's not called a slave. So that he had another teaching from the word called Eved Ish. So basically what we're holding right now is that the Rabbanan held that a person can never force his slave to become a Jew. The slave, if you want the slave to become a Jew, you have to make sure that he accepts upon himself to become a Jew. Because the Rabbanan did not agree by a fast Toyar that you could force the situation. You have to follow the procedure of the Torah. But normally a fast Toyar right away to make her a slave and make her become free, that the Rabbanan didn't hold. So Maskif lo Rapapa questioned this whole premise. Eimer deshamet leila Rabbanan be a fast Toyar. When did the Rabbanan hold by a fast Toyar, by the beautiful woman, that she they didn't hold her that procedure, making her your slave and then freeing her by making her go to the mikveh again and becoming right away a Jew. They said that doesn't work because she doesn't know anything about mitzvahs. Aval Eved, but if you had a slave and for years she's your slave and he was doing some mitzvahs, he was living in your house, the shaykh b'mitzvahs, that he has a concept of what mitzvahs are, maybe hachinami dafilu rabbanim moidi. Maybe the rabbanim would agree that once he knows the mitzvahs already, they don't have to re-accept their commitment right before they go into the mikveh. Even the rabbanim would agree that they don't have to accept it. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa, echad ger, the echad lekeach eved min hagoy. You have a ger, and somebody buys an eved from a goy. Right, a ger has to be mikabel. We just learned before that he has to accept the mitzvahs before the mikvah. But even if you bought a slave from a goy and you want to free the slave right away, tzarech lekabel, he has to accept it. He has to re-accept it right before in the mikvah. So we have medayek holakeach misrael. But if you buy the eved from a Jew and then you bought the eved and you want to free him right away, Ein tzarech lekabel. He doesn't have to re-accept. You could just throw him into the mikvah. Mani, who is the author of this brisa? Rab Shimon ben Elazar. If it goes according to Rab Shimon ben Elazar, Ha'amar, he said, lekeach min hagoy nami ein tzarech lekabel. If you buy from a goy, you also don't have to accept it. You see, Rab Shimon ben Elazar said that with the Yafas Toar, the prisoner of war, make her your slave, and then 2 seconds later, throw her against her will into the mikveh to become a free Jewess. So that Rab Shimon ben Elazar doesn't hold. Even if you buy it from a guy, she doesn't have to accept. That's not the author of this brisa. Elalav, must be that the author of this brisa is Rabbanan. Ushma mina. From here you see that the Rabbanan agree somewhat to Rab Shimon ben Elazar. The lekeach min a goy, when you buy a slave from a goy, so this eved never had any concept of mitzvahs. So you can't just free him right away. He's your slave, now go free, and you become a Jew. You can't force the Jewishness on him. You have tzarech lekabel. In that situation, you have to accept, he has to re-accept, he has to understand what he's accepting. Aval lekeach mi Yisrael, but if you buy it from a Jew, so this Eved was a Jew all the time. He worked by another Jew. Now that you bought him from another Jew, so then, if you want to free him right away, ain't tzarech lekabel, because he knows already what being a Jew is, because he lived around Jews. So therefore, even Rabbanan hold that an Eved doesn't have to re-accept. So then we're back to square one. Why does one brisa say that an Eved mishuchrar, an Eved does have to accept, and another brisa says it doesn't? And we just said that there is no machlokes. Even the Rabbanan will hold that in most situations, an Eved does not have to accept the mitzvahs when he's going to the mikveh. He could just go into the mikveh. What does it say? What does it mean by the brisa saying that a ger and an Eved Meshukra have the same halacha? What halacha do they share in common? Answers the Gemara, Kitanya hi le'inyan tevila tanya. That's it. That brisa was taught regarding going to the mikveh. Regarding going to the mikveh, a ger, a goy, in order to become a ger, has to go to the mikveh, and an eved, even though he already was, had mitzvahs, but to become a full-fledged Jew, he also has to go to the mikveh. But there is a difference. A ger, right before he goes into the mikveh, he has to make a new Kabbalah that he's accepting everything. And you have to tell him all about what he's accepting. And then he goes down under. An Eved, the master can force the whole situation and tell him, listen, I'm demanding you're going into the mikveh, and I'm freeing you, and you're becoming a full-fledged Jew. So interesting concepts about forcing conversions in certain situations, especially if you have a slave. New Gemara, Tana Rabbanim. We learned in the Brisa, and this is the story with the fast Torah. We bring her into your house. Vigilchas roishav asasot tzipor. So what does it mean, asasot tzipor? I know she should shave her head to look ugly, but what is asasot tzipor? What should she do with her nails? So understand this, in the time of the Gemara, having long nails was disgusting and short nails was nice. So Rabbi Lezer says, tuckets. She's supposed to cut her nails, even though in that situation, she's going to look pretty nice. Still, that's what the Asasot Tzipor now. Rabbi Kiva Oima Tagdil. No, Asasot Tzipor now means just the opposite. She's not supposed to cut her nails. She's supposed to make herself have long nails, so you'll be disgusted with her. Amar Rabbi Lezer said, I know my situation is because it says the word asiya by roish, and she's supposed to do something with her hair. And it says she's supposed to do something with her nails. Just like by the hair, she's supposed to cut it all off. Afkan, so also by the nails, ha'avara, she's supposed to cut it all off. But Rabbi Akiva says no. Rabbi Akiva nem asiya baroish. It says the word asiya by she's supposed to do something with her head. The nem asiya b'tziparnaim, it says she's supposed to do something with her nails. Malahalan, just like by the hair nivel, the point of it is to make her disgusting. Afkan nivel, the point is to make her disgusting. The only way to make her disgusting is by having those nails grow long. But the Gemara says, but Rabbi Lezer has a proof from Tanakh that the word v'asasot tzipor means that she should cut them, because the pasuk says u'mifiboshes ben Shaul yarad likras hamelach lo oso raglav lo oso sefamoi. The pasuk says that Mephibosheth did not cut his toenails and did not cut his mustache. And that's the context of that pasuk. So ma asiya, the word asiya means havara, cutting. So also Rabbi Lezer learns v'asasot tzipor. Strangely enough, you're supposed to have her shave her hair off, but according to Rabbi Lezer, she should cut her nails to look somewhat nice. Tana Rabbanan. Another explanation of the pasuk that's Yefastaya. She should cry about her father and mother. Again, doesn't mean you're forcing her to make noises as if she's crying. So what does that mean? So we go to Amud Beis. Rabbi Lezer avia mamish. It means she should cry about her father, really her father. Ima mamish. She should cry about her father or mother. That's what the Chumash means. She should cry that now she's losing her parents because she's becoming Jewish. Rabbi Akiva avia v'ima. It means zu avodah zarah. She should cry that she's relinquishing serving avodah zarah. V'cheinu omer. Where does the word avi come to avodah zarah? Omer la'etz avi atas. That the Yirmiyahu bemoans that the Jews were worshiping idols by saying to a tree, "You are my father." So that's how Rabbi Akiva learns Pshat in the pasuk, that she should cry that she's giving up avodah zarah. The nafkamina would be according to Rabbi Lezer, if it means your father mamish, let's say she didn't have a father, let's say she doesn't have parents. So then, according to Rabbi Lezer, she doesn't have to make the crying motions because she doesn't have parents. But according to Rabbi Akiva, if avia doesn't mean literally her parents, it means her avodah zarah, she would still have to cry. Yerach yomim. How many days does this have to? She's sitting in your living room, crying, wearing disgusting clothing. How long? And having her head shaved. How long does she have to do this for? So the pasuk says Yerach Yamim. So Yerach means Shloshim Yom, 30 days. Shimon ben Elazar, I'm at Tishim Yom. You have 90 days doing this. Why? Yerach Shloshim. The pasuk says Yerach. That means 30. Yomim. The Torah says another days, which we similar to the first days, which is Shloshim, another 30. Then after all this, so it's an extra pasuk, Shloshim, another 30 days. So according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, it's 90 days. Maskif lo Ravina, why don't we say Ema Yerach means Shloshim, Yomim Shloshim, Ba'acha Kain is Kihani, should be another 60, because Yerach is Yomim combined together is 60 days. And so Va'acha Kain should be similar to the first count, which is 60. So you should have a total of 120 days, not 90 days. Kasha, this is difficult. Anyway, But the pasuk reading of the pasuk that we explained is that she only stays 30 days in your house. Tana Rabbanan, Mekaimin avodim she'enim olam. We're allowed to, if an Eved, let's say you don't want to force the bris milah on your Eved. You bought an Eved, a Kanaini. Are you allowed to keep him if he doesn't have a bris milah? Okay, you're not going to eat the carbon pesach, but are you allowed to keep him not gemalit? So Rabbi Shmuel says yes. Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva, no, ain't mekaimin. You're not allowed to keep him around, and you have to sell him back to the avodah zarah, right? You have to sell him to a guy. You can't keep your eved. If you own an eved, you have to make sure he has a bris milah. You're not allowed to keep him around without. The Taisa says because maybe he's going to do yinasach yain, but anyway, it's not really that's the reason. It's because the Taisa says, according to Rabbi Kiva, Avram Avinu was commanded to give a bris milah to all his slaves. Therefore, you're not allowed to keep your own slave that doesn't have a bris milah. Amalei Rabbi Shmuel. So Rabbi Shmuel says, Hareyu oime, but the pasuk says, V'yenafesh ben amoscha. The Torah says, keeping Shabbos, that not only you're supposed to keep Shabbos, but your animals are supposed to keep Shabbos, and your son of your maid is supposed to keep Shabbos. Now that means the son of your maid is someone who doesn't have a bris milah. So we see the Chumash describes a situation where a Jew has a slave that doesn't have a bris milah. So the Gemara says, Amalei. So Rabbi Kiva answered, yes, that word, that vinafesh ben amascha means a slave that doesn't have a bris milah, but the Torah is speaking about a certain situation. It's talking about Belokeach Eved Ben Hashmosas, speak Lemoila HaKosa Medaber. You bought an Eved Friday afternoon, you didn't have a chance to give him a bris milah. And then, so the Torah says, if you happen to have bought a Eved, like an hour before Shkia, so then that Eved, even though it doesn't have a bris milah, you have to make sure that Eved doesn't work for you on Shabbos. But if for long term, let's say over a few days, even Rabbi Kiva will say, you can't keep an Eved that doesn't have a bris milah. If you don't want to hurt him or whatever, you feel bad for him, giving him this bris milah, you have to get rid of him. The Kuli Alma all agree, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva both interpreted the pasuk, Mias v'nafesh ben amoscha be'eved arvor ksiv. They interpreted that the v'nafesh ben amoscha b'hager refers to an Eved that doesn't have a bris milah. My mashma, where do you see that in that pasuk? Maybe ben amoscha, the son of your maid, is talking about a slave that does have a bris milah. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso. V'nafesh ben amoscha be'eved oral hakosim medara. That's talking about an Eved that doesn't have a bris milah, that you have to make sure he keeps Shabbos. Maybe the Torah is only talking about a bris milah slave. There's another pasuk that says you have to make sure on Shabbos that your slave and maids are also resting. Hare Eved Mahu Omer. So there the Torah said the Torah must have been speaking with an Eved that has the bris milah. So what do I use the pasuk v'nafesh ben amascha, that your son of your maid, in other words, your other Eved also has to have rest on Shabbos. That's talking about the Eved Oral, with a slave that does not have a bris milah. So the Torah gives you two examples, an Eved that does have a bris milah, or if you have an Eved that does not have a bris milah, you have to make sure that they're keeping Shabbos. V'hager, the Torah, now we go off a little bit on Shabbos. Hager, just a side point. If you have, the pasuk says, v'hager, if you have a ger in your neighborhood, you have to make sure that he's keeping Shabbos. So the Gemara says, doesn't mean a convert. Zeger toisha. It's a goy that decided that he wants to keep Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So if he's a good guy and keeping the 7 Noahidite laws, you have to make sure that you don't put him to work on Shabbos. Maybe the pasuk is referring to a 100% convert. How do you know it's referring to a ger toishav? So the Gemara says, when the pasuk says v'ger chasher b'sherecha, the Torah does in another place say that a ger, converted guy, has to keep Shabbos. Hare ger tzedek omar, 100% ger already. The Torah already discusses he has to keep Shabbos. Homani mekayim. So how do I interpret the pasuk v'hager? This extra pasuk v'hager, ze ger toishav. This refers to a ger toishav, a ger that accepted upon himself the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. You can't give him work to do for you on Shabbos. So that's that that ends that piece of the Gemara. So again, we had a machloikis between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. If a person has an eved and he doesn't want to give him a bris milah, Rabbi Akiva says you have to get rid of him. Rabbi Shmuel says, no, you can still keep him. Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, "Halakeach eved min hagoy v'lo yirotzo lomo." He buys an eved from a goy, and he doesn't want a bris milah. The goy doesn't want. Let's say the eved says, "I'm so nervous about having a bris milah." So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shua ben Levi said, "A halacha megalgal imoy ad yid beis chodesh." You can, debate with him and keep him around. Try to work with him for 12 months to convince him to get a bris milah. Loimal, but if he doesn't want to get a bris milah after a year, choizer moicher legoyim. So then you sell him back to the goyim. You can't keep him. So sounds like that you could keep him for 12 months. So it sounds like he's not like Rabbi Akiva. Amru Rabbanan kamed Rav Papa. The Rabbanan said this teaching of Rabbi Shua ben Levi in front of Rav Papa. And he said, Kamam, they thought that Rabbi Shua ben Levi was saying his halacha, the like Rabbi Akiva, not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Akiva, if you went according to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva said that you're not allowed to keep an eved that you own an eved that's not keeping a bris milah. Rav Papa, not so. Afilate Rabbi Akiva. You can say that Rabbi Shua ben Levi was talking, even Rabbi Akiva could hold that you can keep the eved for 12 months. Hanimili, when the Rabbi Akiva said you have to get rid of the eved that doesn't want a bris milah, heicha the loy poskel milse. The poskel milse means, Rashi explains, that he didn't accept upon himself that he wants to become Jewish. He didn't even consider that by being sold to a Jew, he wants to become Jewish. So therefore, in that case, then you have to get rid of him right away. But heicha the poskel milse. But in a case where the goy, when you bought him, said, I want to become Jews. So now why doesn't he want to have a bris milah? He's just chickening out. Posca, then even the Rabbi Akiva holds you can keep him and have him for 12 months. But if after 12 months he doesn't want to get a bris milah, then you have to get rid of him. Omer Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana says, Amrita l'shmaitze kamed Rab Zid. I said this teaching to Rab Zid from Nerdoi. Amali, and he said to me, if that is you're giving a little detail about Rabbi Akiva, that Rabbi Akiva would agree that you could keep an eved for 12 months if he accepted upon himself that he wants to become a Jew, just he's chickening to get that bris milah. If so, why did Rabbi Akiva say that the pasuk of Yinofesh ben Amoska Ba'ager is talking about like a unique situation of you have an eved that's an oral because you bought him Friday afternoon? You could even say that you bought him months ago. It's just that he chickened out from having that bris milah, and Rabbi Akiva would agree that you could keep him for 12 months. So, and to the Gemara, Chadam mitrei taimekoma. Yes, he agrees with that scenario too. He just gave you one answer out of two. In other words, Rabbi Akiva holds that you could, if the eved, when you bought him, wants to become Jewish and then it's just chickening out, you can deal with him. You can keep him for at least 12 months. Or even not so, you can have an eved that's an oral if you bought him Friday afternoon and you didn't have time to have a bris milah. So those are the two scenarios where you can interpret the pasuk V'nafesh ben Amos. And he just chose one answer. One more piece of Gemara. Shalach Ravin Mishmei Rabbi Eloi v'chol Rabbaisai Amru Li Mishmoi. Ravin said in the name of Rabbi Eloi, and all the Talmidim who learned by Rabbi Eloi said, agreed and agreed that Rabbi Eloi said the following statement: Eze eved oral shemut l'kaimen. What is an eved that is uncircumcised that you're allowed to keep him? If he made a condition when he bought him that you don't have to get a bris milah. Let's say a guy wants to become an eved, right? So the Jew tells him, okay, I'll buy you as an eved, and we'll make you're scared about having a bris milah. I'll make it conditional that you'll be my slave, but you don't have to get a bris milah. So that could work. So Amru Rabbanan Kamed Rav Papa. So Rabbanan told over this Rabbi Eloi teaching to Rav Papa. Come on, to like Rabbi Akiva. This must not go according to Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva says there's no way. You can't keep an eved that doesn't want to get a bris milah. Amalei Rav Papa says Afila Tamer Rabbi Akiva. When it was Rabbi Akiva talking about when you purchased him, you didn't make this condition. If you made a condition with him, asne, then it's a good condition. Even Rabbi Kiva would agree. If before you bought the Eved, the guy wants to become an Eved of a Jew, and you told him, but he said, I don't want a bris milah. If you took that condition with him, then he doesn't have to get the bris milah. Amar Rav Kahana, Amricha l'shmaitza kamei de Rav Zvid min Adroi. And I told over this interpretation in front of Rav Zvid from Nadoi that it could go according to Rabbi Kiva. Amalei ihachi ki kamalei Rabbi Kiva l'keach eve ben shmashvel hisveg l'mayla l'shnei le'baha. Rabbi Kiva, when he was answering Rabbi Yishmael and trying to find the case of binafesh ben amascha that the pasuk is talking about an oral, he has another situation. You don't have to say that it's talking about you bought a Erev Shabbos. You could say you bought an Eved with the condition that you don't have to give him a bris milah. So why didn't he answer that? So we answered back to Rav Kahana, to Rav Zvid. So we answered Rav Zvid, Lishne Lei Bahach. Why don't we say the Rabbi Kiva could have given another scenario where what we just said before, that if the Eved accepted to have the bris milah but still is chickening out, you could, even Rabbi Kiva holds that you could keep him for 12 months. Ella rachad mitrei utlas time coming. Rabbi Kiva just chose two or three answers. So basically, where we're holding right now, and then we'll finish off with the following Gemara, and that's it. Where we're holding right now, is it possible to have an Eved that doesn't have a bris milah? Are you allowed to hold on to an Eved that doesn't want to have a bris milah? According to Rabbi Yishmael, yes. According to Rabbi Kiva, not so. But Rabbi Kiva is lenient in certain situations. First, if the Eved chickens out a little bit and says, I need another 12 months to think about it, we don't make him have the bris milah right away. We give him time. And the second thing is that if, when you purchased him, you took out an explicit condition that you become my slave and you don't have to have a bris milah, even Rabbi Kiva would hold that this Eved you don't have to have you're allowed to keep this Eved without the bris milah. Yosef Rab Chanina Bar Papi Rab Ami Rab Yitzchak Napra Killer the Rab Yitzchak Napra. By the porch of Rab Yitzchak Napra, you have Rab Chanina and Rab Ami Rab Yitzchak all sitting around. Yosef Yikame. And they said like this: Ir Achas Hoyse Be'eretz Yisrael. There was one city in Israel, and they had goyim that they bought for slaves. V'loy Ratzu Avadah Lamo. And this city in Israel, none of the slaves that the Jews bought wanted to have a bris milah. The Gilgali Imam Achnei Masa Chodesh, and they tried to convince them to get the bris milah for 12 months. And then when these avodim chickened out, Chazru Umachrim L'Goyim, they resold these avodim to goyim. You can't have an Eved that doesn't want to have a bris milah. If he originally wanted to have a bris milah, and then he says, I need another 12 months, and then he still doesn't want to, you can't keep it. Come on. Who is this going like? Yehaitana. The time we learned in the Brisa, Lakeach Eved min a goy. V'loy Ratzalomo. You bought an Eved from a goy, and he doesn't want to have a bris milah. Megalgal ima achnei masachaydi. You work with him for 12 months, please. It's not so painful. We're going to get you anesthesia, and for 12 months. Loy mal. If he still doesn't want to have the bris milah, choyzrei moichel goyim. You sell him. You have to sell him to goyim. You can't keep it. This is like in coincide with what Rabbi Akiva said. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar oimer ein mashin oisei be'eretz Yisrael mepnei hafsataris. He has a new thing. You cannot have an Eved that doesn't have a bris milah if in anywhere in Israel. Outside of Israel, yes, but in Israel, not, because there's things that are done b'tahara. The Eved, with not having a bris milah, has a din like a zav, so he's going to be tama things. He's going to cause a loss to, let's say you're eating a carbon in your house. He's going to cause a loss. So because of hesed taharas, we don't keep him around. Even according to the Tanakama, who said you can't keep an Eved who doesn't have a bris milah, but if it's a city in Israel that's right next to the border, and you bought an Eved and he doesn't want to have a bris milah, so then you're in a vulnerable place in Israel, because if you live on the border, right, you're like living in the Golan Heights, so you're on the border. So then, if this Eved says, I want to be your slave, but I don't want the bris milah, ein mashin oisei kol ikar. We don't allow him to stay your slave for a minute. Why? Shema yishma davar. Maybe he will be a spy and hear something going on amongst the Jews He may go spy to his friend, the guy, across the border, because it's easy to just, go across the border and tell his neighbor, the guy, what the Jews are planning or how the Jews are defending themselves. So it's a dangerous situation to keep an Eved that doesn't want to have a bris milah. So that was the discussion today about avodim and bris milah and becoming a ger. Okay, Be'ezus Hashem, we'll continue tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yes.
Welcome.